get nervous about the Metcon and they're really not present for the strength training.
Are they not intuitive enough to realize, like, hey, I don't think this works really well for a class?
Sacrificing one of the two. If we can separate them both and get the optimal benefit from both, why not do both?
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Strong Goal Podcast. I'm Wendy, and I'm joined by Rob and Dom. If these guys are on camera, you know we're going to be talking about training. Today's topic is a study that came out from WOD Science. You may have seen it on Instagram, but basically it's all about gains in CrossFit and what type of training style would lead to bigger gains. So they had about 38 athletes, all of whom were trained CrossFitters at that RX level, so they knew what they were doing, fairly strong. And they had them either do the traditional CrossFit class method where you do strength followed by Metcon, or they separated strength and endurance on separate days. And then they did a test before the training and then after, like things like the CrossFit Total, Fran, Max Clean. And it showed that the athletes that separated their training actually had bigger gains in CrossFit. So I'm gonna let these guys discuss that study and their thoughts on it.
One, I'll jump in right away. They said it was the original. That's not original CrossFit. That's not how CrossFit was laid out originally. Mm-hmm. So
the strength in Metcon?
Yeah, that came much later. So that's not even written. There's a ton of argument. That's not original. I'm like, okay, we noticed a long time ago where that came from people. But what we noticed when we were doing it, because we tried it in a class situation. I'm not even making an argument about gains athletes or like the structure for that. I'm just talking about general population in a class. You only have really about 40 minutes by the time you warm up. So in that time, is that enough time to go ahead and do proper strength training and people work on it and really know what they're doing and practicing, and then get ready to go into some kind of intense Metcon?
Right.
I couldn't find the time. Well, not only the time, physiologically, now that they're coming out saying that's not exactly the way it works really well at all, because the interference effect, and we've talked about this before.
Absolutely.
So interference effect is interruption to adaptation. So you're doing two things and it's kind of interrupting them both.
So it's concurrent training.
Yeah, but it's kind of taken away. Yes.
Yeah.
Not concurrent training doesn't do that if it's separated or kind of laid out right. But not only that, it's not only physiological, it's psychologically.
Yeah.
Like you can't, like mentally, half the people or even more can't get ready from going from a strength to some intense conditioning.
Because you always have that reserve factor, right, in your head, like psychologically. You're like, all right, I got to get to this max clean or max snatch, and then I have to do 75 more of this same exact movement pattern in a workout. Mm-hmm. So your brain is always going to hold back, or you're going to have one that suffers, right? So if I'm in a workout, I want to go max clean in my head. I'm like, the workout means nothing to me. So why am I even doing it? You get what I'm saying? So it's kind of like what Rob's saying, like in layman's terms, it's like we're in that position now where we're sacrificing one of the two. If we can separate them both and get the optimal benefit from both, why not do both?
Right, and I think mentally too, people they get nervous about the Metcon and they're really not present for the strength training because they're just so ready to leap into that other thing and perform. And they get the high off everybody likes the WOD, that
your
sort of
score
thing.
And racing, like that's so exciting, but separating the two, we know, based off science, that they are way more beneficial. Like you have people who come to the gym just to lift. You've been in the gym where they don't care about the workout. They're like, okay, don't even count my score. Right. I want to put my number. I want to get the gold star. I want a PR. Mm-hmm. The other people who are like, I don't care about my lifting. I just want to sweat and die on the floor. So separating the two obviously makes way more sense.
Yeah, I mean, when we did it, I just could not make it work. I was like, there's not enough time. Yeah. I don't understand. And so I had to take a look back. I was like, can I just not figure it out? I said, where did this come from? And I dove way back to where it came from because CrossFit didn't bring it up, and they still don't write it like that.
Yeah, they don't.
And it started coming out from strength coaches way back when, you're talking 2001, 2002, 2003, on trying to figure out how to bring more strength work into CrossFit because they looked at it as like much more conditioning, regardless if there were strength moves being done in it.
Absolutely.
And so they started bringing it out, and then somehow it got adopted by all these coaches that were programming for the games, all these popular sites.
Yeah.
The thing is, I started to realize later on, I was like, none of these gym owners and coaches, are they not intuitive enough to realize like, hey, I don't think this works really well for a class? Because right away, I realized it. And so I started noticing, it's like, so everyone's just following everybody else.
Yeah.
They're not willing to go against
Yeah.
the grain and do what's best for their people a lot of times.
Well, a lot of the coaches that you see, are in that position because it's like they have to please the member. I got to keep people in these doors, and it makes sense that people are like, oh, we don't lift enough, or we don't do conditioning enough. So how do I please everybody? I try to split it right down the middle. I sacrifice the strength, and then I condense the conditioning. So now you're putting conditioning in a box where there's no gears, there's no pacing, and they have strength. It's in a box. There's no rest time. There's no recovery.
Right.
So it's like, oh, well, hindsight, if I'm somebody who doesn't know anything about strength training or anything about capacity of conditioning, this sounds perfect because I can get the best of both worlds in the hour.
Right. And then you've got the people that can't go heavy yet, and they're
Yeah.
standing around looking at the people
Waiting,
that are
yeah.
still barely warming
Flying,
up,
yeah, we've
and
been in that, yeah.
you're limited. So so obviously many CrossFit gyms do it this way now. Rob and I tried to help a CrossFit gym in Minneapolis change their programming,
Yeah.
and that's the format they had, and we came in guns ablazing and just changed it. Went from
Yeah.
a complete 180.
Yeah.
It was met with so much resistance.
Oh,
we had
yeah.
to educate, communicate. So I wouldn't suggest that a gym owner just does that.
Yeah.
So what would be your guys' advice for somebody who's looking for a better way for their for their gym and for their athletes? How do you make that change?
Well, the first thing is education.
Yeah.
And we taught it wrong, basically. It sounded really good in application, but it doesn't work really well once you bring it out to a class with a small amount of time. Like really quickly, you got to understand what CrossFit was in the beginning. It was like an open source model, like an AI almost. So every time a coach came by and had more information, they were going to integrate that into their program.
Yeah.
So they stopped doing that to a certain extent. So we all stopped, all the coaches stopped learning, and then we just went to that. So keep on learning, and then you got to educate your people on what works best, and start slowly. Maybe have one complete strength day, and then one complete conditioning, and then one complete metabolic conditioning by itself, and then start integrating little by little by little. From that,
right.
you got to go take those small
Still
steps.
keep a few of your wads in during the week, and then slowly
Yeah.
bring them out. And if people start seeing gains, they're going to have buy-in.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. And even like you said, the education part, but introducing the week layout to people. I think a lot of CrossFit gyms now, where they release the workout like the night before.
Yep.
So in my head, I have no way to prepare for the next day. I have no way to map out my week of training. So in my head, I'm like, all right, well, if I can't do my strength training tomorrow, I'm going to do it anyway. And then tomorrow you get there and it's the same movement pattern you did the day before. So if you introduce the week of like, hey guys, this is our strength day. So psychologically, I know today I'm lifting. I'm not getting into a higher intensity of my aerobic system. I'm going to be straight lifting, rest times, all the good stuff. The next day may be your conditioning day, right? So psychologically, I'm going in there and I'm going to have high intensity. I'm going to have intervals. I'm going to have pacing. It kind of prepares the brain better. I love when the week's laid out for me for training because I can predict how I show up, and then I'm preparing myself mentally to take
100%.
on the physical aspect.
And then
of what's
knowing
being
that week is part of a bigger plan.
bigger plan, exactly. Working
is
backwards from the
That's
goal.
huge.
right,
Yes.
because I think so many gym owners, sometimes they write it the night before.
Yeah.
Okay, where are we sore?
Or
What
they're
did
just
we
grabbing
do?
it from
Yeah,
somewhere.
but it should be this template with a certain emphasis for 6-8 weeks, whatever, and then that's how we do it. We say, hey guys, new training phase starts Monday. This is what the intent is, and then or this is the last week of the training phase, whatever. So this is what we're doing and why. So I think letting people
100%.
in and not it's not like just do what I say.
Yeah, and the thing is too, as far as the gym owners, programs, and the coaches, you never looked at the workout, or maybe they got the programming from somewhere else, and as the week was going on, never thought hey, this might be too much, and I should adjust this, because programming should be written in pencil.
Right.
Yeah.
And back in the day, I used to write to 6 or 12 weeks all up.
Yeah.
And I would have to go back and adjust it all the time. We would have to adjust all the time. It's I didn't realize how it's overlapping, how it's affecting it.
Yeah.
And once you start getting into it, you start realizing when there's too much fatigue in workouts, and there's too much metabolic conditioning.
Yeah.
Fatigue turns all exercises into a low back exercise
Oh, yeah.
practically.
Yeah.
So then you realize,
Yeah.
oh my God, everyone's lower back is getting used up a lot more than I realized.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you got to be a little more intuitive and be willing to change and maybe go against the grain of whatever famous programming I'm getting.
Yeah.
And your people will thank you over time for that.
Well, it goes back to education and then even an element of experience, right? If people think that if I do a squat on Monday, I do lunges on Tuesday, 2 different movements. That's a squat and a single leg squat.
Yes.
And even in that having experience, like, okay, I'm doing these workouts, I'm noticing that I'm in the same position that I was in the day before that. And then the next day I go back to another movement of squat cleans. It's like, oh, we didn't squat every day. Yes, you did.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
in your head, you're like, no, because they're 3 different movements, same movement pattern. And I think the best coaches have that layout of like, these are my movement patterns I'm going to do. This is my reps. This is my volume.
Right.
And then they continue to work backwards from that instead of being like, all right, we're going to just plug and play. These are 5 movements. I'm going to put them in every workout today.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, overlapping movement patterns and constantly like touching them is one of the biggest issues I see with that volume all the time. And a lot of times they don't realize what they're doing.
Yeah.
Is they're overlapping them constantly. And when you're doing Metcons daily, that tends to happen a lot.
Yeah.
I don't run into that much problems with doing dedicated strength days and then dedicated, basically like conditioning days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. All right, so I mean, I think Wad Science did a great job with this
Excellent.
study. I think it's something
Yeah.
that
Need
needed
more
to
of
be,
those.
it's something that needed to be said to that audience.
One more thing before you stop. There's an argument about it all the time, and what the people were going online, it's always like a level 2 or level 3 CrossFit coach, and I think that's all they have, or like they've only like spent their time in that, is that they argue about the tests were separated. So it has segmented fitness.
Yeah.
And so Greg Glassman coined this, so segmented fitness. So there's like some famous hybrid athletes that go out there, they'll back squat 500, bench 300, deadlifts 500 or 5 something, and do a mile run in under 6 minutes.
Yeah.
And so CrossFit people, and Glassman says that's segmented fitness. So if you went ahead and made that 200 pounds everything and a 400-meter run and you did 5 rounds, that person would not do as good as the person that does that type of fitness. I'm like, well, no shit, because it's segmented.
Yeah.
And he doesn't, it's specific. He's not practicing that.
No.
That argument's lame because that guy that has those numbers has a much bigger base.
Yeah.
So go ahead and have him practice that a little bit, and I guarantee he will outdo the person that only does that training.
Right. Yeah.
So that argument's like pretty lame when it comes to
Doesn't
it.
make
It's
any
like,
sense.
they're just not. But of course, if someone touches something, they're gonna be most likely better than the person that is not touching
Exactly.
it. And that's just kind of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that argument to me is always like, oh yeah, that doesn't count.
It doesn't count. It doesn't hold any weight.
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
No.
All right, so Wad Science, good job.
Thank you.
Like the message, and if you are a CrossFit coach or gym owner, rethink the whole strength Metcon format.
And practice, like experience it a little bit more, like dive into it, like put yourself in that position where you do your own training that way and see how you get results
In a 40-minute window.
in a 40-minute window. Yeah.
And like
see what
once a week or once in a while is not a big deal.
happens. No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's fun. All right, thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next time.